We take kind of a broad look at the mission, and we really look at kind of two facets of it. We say it's kind of to inform and engage the community. We say it's to inform and engage and create a more prosperous community, because I believe an informed and engaged community leads to prosperity.
All right, welcome to the next episode of the Greater Texas Podcast, and we are very lucky to be joined by Joel Gross, the CEO of the Austin Monitor, one of the truly great local newspapers. I don't know, do we still call them newspapers?
We'll use the broad catch-all term today. I think that's fair, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Honor the legacy of the of the news business.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining us today, Joel. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Sean.
Okay. Well, let's start with a little bit about your background. You're from this area originally, right?
Yeah, I'm one of those rare natives. So it's kind of a sweet story, actually. I was born at Seaton downtown, and then about a year ago, my son was born there
Oh,
too.
nice.
So we
Yeah.
have a second generation Texan as well, or Austinite as well. And yeah, so I was born in Austin. I actually grew up in kind of the greater Austin area, and then went to school at UT. So have seen the city
Did it change a little bit?
a little bit since I
I mean, it was a
young.
sleepy small town a little bit, right?
It-
College town, basically.
It was a college town. You had your local government here.
Right.
You had, and this is what actually brought my parents here, kind of the early tech industry. So my dad worked at Motorola, which then turned into Freescale, which I think now turned into XP. And he was one of those early tech workers. He and my parents, we lived in Dripping Springs for the school district, and then my dad commuted into work every day, and that was pretty common, I think, for kind of a lot of Austin experience back then.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And when you were at UT, you majored in communications,
I
right?
did communications, which again is about a broad as catch-all as the newspaper term that we used at the top there. But so I did communications. It was I like talking to people, so I figured it was a good next step for me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then you started out in working in education, basically?
Yeah. So I kind of was looking at a lot of different things, but my first kind of real job was actually on Capitol Hill in the U.S. Senate. I was working for a senator there, trying to do press and communications for her. And I say trying because I was really learning. I was
You were right out of school.
Yeah, I was right out of school. I wanted to be there, and it was a really exciting place to be there in Washington, D.C. And but it was trial by fire, and that's kind of where I really cut my teeth on the news and communication
Gotcha.
industry at that point.
Okay. And then you came back to Austin at some point?
Yeah, so eventually after my kind of tour of duty on Capitol Hill, which usually the young people go for about 2 or 3
Right.
years, and then they're on to the next adventure.
But, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Is it pretty normal for a PR person, for a senator to be right out of school?
Yeah, actually, it's funny, and across all of the staff, it's pretty young folks. You have some senior people in there that have can kind of guide the ship in there. But a lot of times it's younger people that are right out of school that are really willing to work hard, that have a passion for it.
For a little money, right?
Yeah, and that frankly, that's what it is, and we and so usually you'll get a 2 years, and then they'll go leverage that in private industry to make a lot of money. Me, on the other hand, I went to Costa Rica for a little while and lived on the beach and taught English there to the local
that's
students.
not
So
so
I actually
bad, yeah.
spent my money,
Yeah.
but then came back to Austin because my family is here and I want
Right.
to be here.
And that's when you started in education.
Yeah, so I kind of
Companies.
I was in kind of that ed tech space. I had my own kind of education curriculum program. It was kind of focused on what I saw was missing education, kind of core skills that wasn't really addressed in primary or secondary school, but I felt was kind of still important, that I had observed that a lot of my colleagues and friends were missing. And so I did that for a little while. But ultimately kind of eventually made my way to the nonprofit industry. And I've been in the nonprofit industry for about, close to, almost a decade here.
Okay. Well, let's talk about what you're doing now. When did you move to the Austin Monitor?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. I had I was on kind of my second nonprofit role here in the Austin area, and I wasn't really looking for anything at that point, but this opportunity came across my desk for the Austin Monitor, which was at the time a pretty niche focused local publication that focused kind of on the intersection of the community and local government. It was very issue focused. It's not opinion. It's really in depth, kind of wonkish, some people would call it. And I'd heard about it, but it wasn't super familiar. And I met with some of the board at the time, and they said, "Hey, we really feel that in Austin there's a need for this type of work. We're looking for someone who might help take this publication to the next level." And for them, what they meant of that was making it a bit more accessible, which was essentially removing the paywall, making it free to read for the entire community. Because their belief, and I share this belief, was that the community was hungry to have a greater understanding of some of these local issues. They were hard to find local news on these issues, and the Monitor could really fill that void. It would take a lot of work to do it. Would they find someone who was willing to take that challenge? And they took a chance on me, and I've been there for about a little over 2 years at this point.
Right. So what do you see? I completely agree. We do need this, obviously. But what do you see as the mission of the Austin Monitor in Austin?
Yeah, so we take kind of a broad look at the mission, and we really look at kind of two facets of it. We say it's kind of to inform and engage the community. We say it's to inform and engage and create a more prosperous community, because I believe an informed and engaged community leads to prosperity. I think what makes strong communities is when people feel like they're connected and they have agency and a voice in where they live. And that's kind of that's why we take that broad looking angle with the Monitor. And so I want to draw the distinction between that inform and engage. What I mean by that is a lot of times, when we think of informing, it's people becoming aware of issues and then beginning to follow those issues a little bit more closely. The engage aspect is when they feel like they have a good understanding of that issue and are ready to, potentially take the next step with that. A lot of times that's maybe even just showing up at a voting booth. That's an action taken with some information that you've gathered and received. And that kind of dynamic of becoming aware, understanding, following, and taking action, that's kind of what we believe is a through line to a strong, civically healthy community.
Gotcha. And we're going to talk about where that falls in sort of the news world. But the mission and what you're talking about is so important, because the local news and local issues are, we talk about this all the time when we talk about elections and national elections and or where people show up, when they really should be showing up to their local elections. It's what moves the needle.
It is what's moved the needle, and it's closest to home. It's arguably where your voice is loudest, right?
Exactly,
where you have as much the most influence as possible. And you see this a lot in the local kind of elections, and just engagement in general is a lot of times lower on the local level. And that's kind of the reverse way of what we hope it should be. And with a lot of these big macro changes that we've experienced over the last couple of years, COVID to name the top one, we begin to look at our communities in a different lens and recognizing just how important they are. And so I think there's what I'm hopeful for is there's the beginning of a sea change to people to recognize, I want to feel the strong connection with where I live.
Right.
To be able to do that, I need an information bridge, an information source that helps connect me to that. And that's why I think you're seeing this almost renaissance of local news begin to emerge, and it's not without its challenges. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that. But
let's talk about how you've changed the model a little bit for the Austin Monitor and what you're going to now.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, when I was looking at the job, originally the first kind of milestone vision was to be able to make this more accessible to the community. We are a nonprofit news organization, which actually is a relatively new concept. For the vast majority of the history of news, it's been a for-profit enterprise, right? That essentially sold advertising, had classifieds, had small subscriptions, and subsidized good local reporting. Now, what we wanted to do was we wanted to make this a bit more accessible. And so we looked to other kind of nonprofit news models that had done this. And there's one right in the backyard by the name of the Texas Tribune. And these guys are, when they launched in 2010 or 2009 or 2010, they were one of the first big nonprofit news organizations that said, hey, we want to make this fully accessible. And a lot of the industry, the traditional legacy news industry, kind of looked at this with, let's just call it a healthy skepticism at first. Can this actually work? And about a decade later, the Texas Tribune has really made a name for themselves as a strong and respected news organization. And they've done it by keeping it free and fully accessible. We wanted to try to take that model that they had really popularized and shown that could be sustainable. We wanted to do it for Austin.
So what they're doing at the state level, you're
doing at the local level. And I think we're starting to see that happen in cities across the country because
That's a good. Let's transition into that if you don't want. Let's talk about the state of the news.
Which is I'm always happy to talk about that. So the information space, what I call kind of a shared information space in the broadest sense, is in a really interesting spot right now. It's changed dramatically over the last couple of decades. If you think about, I mentioned the last couple of decades. If you think about to the early 2000s, the internet had been around for a while. This was pre-social media, and then you fast forward to now, and it's just very dramatically different. And so it has been really hard for the traditional legacy news industry to kind of keep a pace with this. And what you're seeing happening is that there's a ton of increased competition out there. And when that increased competition for-profit news entities, they really have to get tight and to make sure that they are fulfilling their objective of generating a return, right? A lot of times what that means is sometimes some of the non-money making entities might begin to fade in the time. And sometimes what that means is that local news, the kind of local reporting really begins to kind of disappear a little bit.
And you can see this. Look, the Austin American Statesman's a very good paper. But it has very little local coverage. I mean, if you want to read about a city council meeting, you're not going to read about that in the Austin American Statesman.
No. And I think the Statesman, you're seeing this in Houston and Dallas and Fort Worth and El Paso. And I mention all those cities very intentionally because those have been cities where there have been a kind of emergent nonprofit news focus model, just like what we're doing, begin to fill that void
for the local news.
Begin to fill that void of that local, because ultimately, on the local level, you want to know where those tax dollars are going. You want to know what your local elected officials are doing. These are the decisions you are going to be called upon to weigh in November, and so you need a steady flow of information to get you there. And if you're not getting it, from the legacy newspapers, you're going to need to get it somewhere to have a healthy community.
Right. Yeah, and we can go into a little bit about that, like how having access to the local news provides for a healthy community.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, that was the essence of why we made this decision, was an accessibility, belief in that, to be able to access local information of elected officials that represent you, decisions that affect you. We believe that information should be free and accessible, right? We shouldn't need to put up a financial barrier or a paywall or an inequitable barrier around that news, because that affects your daily life, right? There arguably is nothing more sacred than where you live, right? And the information about where you live, about the trajectory of where you're living, about the community of where you're living, that means a great deal to you. And so, that's kind of was our premise. And when we shifted the model in late 2021, the hope was, hey, we hope we actually get some more readers with this shift. That was why we're doing it.
Right.
And in 2022, last year, our first full year, we were able to get about over 150,000 new readers coming in, which was really a very positive sign for us, but also, I believe, a positive sign for the Austin community. People really do care. They're really curious. They want to be informed. That's a great sign, right? It would be a much harder, a much deeper conversation if just no one cared what was going on. That's never been the case, really, in Austin. People care. They have very strong opinions about what's going on here in Austin.
Who do you find are the people, or who are you trying to reach? And who are you finding that you're reaching?
Yeah, so the Monitor built up. It launched as a nonprofit in 2013. And it built up a really core following of folks that were deeply involved in local city government. They probably worked or did business with local government. And that was kind of the core readership until we switched the model. Right now, we're trying to get kind of what we call that next level of audience, that people that are that are curious about what's going on in the city, but may not know where to begin, that may be a little bit intimidated to kind of get into, say, hey, what does the city council do, and what are their purview, and kind of things like that. And so we're trying to get that next level of audience, of community member that is curious but may not be very deep in their what we call civic journey, right?
Yeah.
The people that are pretty far deep in their civic that live and talk news on a daily basis, they're probably pretty aware of who we are and what's going on. But there's a lot of people that are in that kind of that big middle section that are may have heard some things here and there. And what we'd like to do is help them gain a deeper understanding and follow these issues a little bit more closely.
And one thing I really like about your paper and or site or whatever,
Yeah.
is we've talked about this a little bit before. Like I get home, whatever, 7:00 at night. There's no news on TV anymore. And look, there's opinion programs which are fine, but they're creating such division in our community.
Yeah.
And I think it's a real issue and a real problem. Everything is political now, and you can't have a normal discussion with others.
You can't. It's really hard. It becomes very personal. Politics is not only everything it seems political. It's also personally political, which makes it really hard to have a healthy debate with someone. I think that's one of the strongest parts about our approach is that since we launched in 2013, we've always been non-opinion, right? And it's just kind of a fact-based news approach. And as you mentioned, there's nothing wrong with opinion per se, but if that's the only voice in the room, then you're missing something in the equation there. Also, I think one of the challenges in the media landscape is that a lot of times opinion is butted up against traditional fact-based news. And if you are not a super well-versed media scholar or a media consumer, those may blend together.
Right.
And there's a big difference between those. And that's actually a big part of our mission is to help reinforce this idea of what separates our approach from others. I think it's become very blurry, especially because the media landscape is so crowded right now. So there's a lot of gray area around that.
What do you think is sort of like the future of where the news landscape is going? The media landscape, I should say.
Yeah, it's a challenging one. The media industry has actually struggled by and large a lot over the last couple years. I think, speaking from the local news space, I think you're seeing a really strong, and I'm excited about this, a really strong kind of uprising of nonprofit-based news, that the type that we do. I mentioned Fort Worth, El Paso, San Antonio, and even Houston has just made an announcement of a really big nonprofit news initiative. And so I think that is going to be something you're going to see really begin to fill the void. The question is, it can certainly have legs in bigger metro cities, but in your smaller towns, what does that look like in terms of local news? I don't quite know. And so like we're still trying to get that figured out. What I do know is that something has to be there. You can't, like the way that our democracy works, the way that community works, you have to have a trusted information source. Otherwise you begin to have a litany of problems that come.
Agreed. And there's, like you said, there's no real barriers to entering. I mean, I'm going to say this on the podcast. I get on the TikTok sometimes. Right?
There it is. There it is right there. Influencer.
But interesting that like you'll see like when SVB, when Silicon Valley Bank failed, there were a bunch of finance guys on there talking about and kind of explaining what happened. And I know they're doing it probably so they can drive business to their whatever, but they're talking about news, right?
They are.
Like, and they're presenting news.
They are. And some I bet a fair amount of that is probably factual based and really valuable.
Yeah.
Some of it may not be.
For sure.
It's all blended together on the platform, right?
Right.
One of the things that news has got right historically is, a lot of your established news companies do have journalistic standards there.
Right.
And one of those parts about the journalistic standards is if you happen to get something wrong, you issue a correction. That is how you uphold trust and transparency there. If you issue something wrong on TikTok, you're not going out and throwing up another video to say, actually, I got something wrong.
That's
there.
a real problem.
It is a real problem, right? And that's why, like, the concept of a news company with standards, that should never disappear from the public sphere, right? But it's being really crowded out right now. Where do people want to go to get their information? Not just news. And I'm talking about information in general. People are going to the social media platforms and they're going to the streaming services. And so there's a ton of competition for your attention. News should be a part of that because it matters. It has issues that affect where you live, like I was talking about earlier. But it's really tough to get into that daily routine of making that a part of your information consumption.
And let's talk about one of the reasons that this is also important and what Austin Monitor is doing is so important is this is an interesting time to be in Austin. There's so much change, and we've had obviously. I'm not asking you for your opinion on this. I'm just what you see is coming. with the election last November that changed a lot of the city council. And what do you see as the big issues and coming forward from the city?
No, I think Austin's such an interesting place to live right now because it was already an up and coming city, really from throughout the 2000s, but it really reached another tier, in my opinion, really another level of acceleration in the late 2010s. And so a lot of these core issues on what makes any city important: transportation, public safety, housing. Thank you. Yes, of course. That have been around for a while are really beginning to reach kind of this boiling point, right? And that is just really exacerbated by the fact that Austin has had a ton of growth, right? And so like when you bring in a lot of new people, when you have a city that is designed for, a certain population size and that population size begins to grow, it brings up interesting leadership questions, interesting policy questions. You mentioned the election in November that not only brought in new city council members, that brought in a new mayor,
right?
And that now we have a new interim city manager as well. I mean, some of the top positions that run the city from a governmental standpoint are in place, and so that level of change just hasn't been seen before. If you pair that with some of these longstanding issues and the population growth that the Austin area has seen, you have a really interesting question on what this city and community looks like for the coming years.
And I think we're making those decisions now.
We are
for the next whatever.
I would say
decades, right?
Decades, exactly. So that's why being informed and engaged means that like these will have long-lasting ramifications, right? And so a lot of these things that we've frankly been kicking down the road are now getting to a point where we're about to hit a wall where we just can't kick it down the road any further. And so there's big decisions that and big issues that we are addressing right now that will kind of shape what Austin looks like. And a lot of people, for good reason, care very strongly about that. Austin's a really unique city, has a unique culture, a unique history. What will that look like for Austin in 2030? I mean, some of those issues are being addressed right now.
A big one that it's important to me, so I bring it up all the time. I just think it's important to me in that I think it's really important to this city is the I-35 expansion or renovation or whatever you want to call it. And I feel like when you have that conversation, there's a lot of people that just aren't informed about what's going on. And those things are happening right now.
They are happening right now.
And that will transform this city.
It really will. It's such a visible shared space that we encounter, and a lot of folks, I agree with you, are just not even aware of the discussions that are going on with this. And from our perspective, again, since we're a non-opinion based publication, we want more people to be aware, right? We want more people to be informed, to say, oh wow, this is actually what's going on right now. And we believe that the more people are informed, the healthier community you have. If you do not have many people aware of what's going on and change occurs, the outcome of that could have unintended consequences that could really, create some challenges down the road.
I agree. Yeah, agreed. I like to. This was a stat I saw, and I bring it up all the time. It's fascinating to me. So we're at about 2.3 million people in the MSA right now. The projection for 2050 is 5 million people.
Absolutely.
It's insane, right? And like, where are all those people going to go? Those are the decisions we're making today.
Right now. Exactly, right.
And you have to read the Austin Monitor to be
I think you do. And I mean, that level of growth, essentially doubling the population size, that is, it can sound abstract, but I can tell you it would bring forth an extreme amount of change, right? And that can be intimidating. Change is always intimidating, to be sure. What we want is people to feel like they are involved in that change, that they can add their voice to that change, that they are being able to shape the community that they want to be in, that they want their kids, that they want their grandkids to be in, right? One thing that is going to happen is more people are going to come to Austin.
Exactly.
Barring something, completely unexpected, more and more people will begin to come here. And that's by virtue of that the town has a lot going for it right now. It's a really special city, but it also is dealing with some really major challenges right now. And, it's just an interesting time to be here.
So when people come here, just because Austin's growing and people, and I don't know what you said. I think you said Boring Company's looking at
Yeah.
Bastrop, and of course Samsung's in Taylor. So the surrounding communities are going to grow too. Are those issues that you're covering also the surrounding communities?
Yeah, so that's like kind of on our growth vision. So our first kind of step was let's make this accessible to everyone, right? We're about a year beyond that, and we've had, like I mentioned, we've had really good signals that that's going well. What we hope to, we were talking about this a bit earlier. Austin is really becoming a regional area. For a long time, our neighbors up north and to the south in Houston and Dallas, they've been regional areas for a long time.
Right.
Austin for a long time has been, you have your city core, you have your town surrounding it, but there hasn't been just that synchronization between those. I think we're getting ready. If we haven't already passed it, we're getting ready to make this really be viewed as a regional area. You want to report and cover on that regional area. And so, our focus right now is the city of Austin, but as we grow and as the city grows, we want to bring in that coverage from the surrounding areas because that's the through line of understanding. You can't just understand, hey, the road just doesn't, I-35 just doesn't end at the edge of Austin.
Right,
It goes,
right.
and so like, what does that look like? And that's kind of what, like how we will want the future of what the Austin Monitor.
Does that present challenges for you, obviously?
It does. I mean, like as a nonprofit news organization, we want to build up resources to make sure we have the reporters that can cover the news, that can go in depth, that can uphold kind of the editorial approach that we built out there. And so, that's why as a nonprofit, we look to the community for support, right? That's, one of that. I think that's what makes the model really interesting is that when the community believes in what we are doing, we're able to do what we are doing even to a higher extent. And so that's why, like, we really make sure that we are leading with that mission and serving first. If we're not doing that, we actually can't even continue to, it's not even financially viable for us to survive. And so like our fate is intimately tied into kind of how well we are doing our job.
Right.
Yeah.
And with the growth of the area.
Exactly.
I mean, look, I say this all the time, but it's so vital to be informed of the community. And like you said, it helps grow the community.
Yeah.
And that's what the Austin Monitor does better than just about anyone around. And so, if you're out there and you're not reading the Austin Monitor, you need to start.
You should. And I'll tell you why. Just because, our coverage really does try to be very localized. And the issues that are in your neighborhood, the issues that are in your block, that are in your kind of your area, your city council district, they really do affect you. And I bet you, if you just kind of make it a part of your daily routine, you will see an article that says, actually, I did see that down the road. Now I'm curious of what's going on for that. That magic kind of dynamic there is what we believe. We'd like to see that happen over and over again. You really, people care about where they live. That's the essence of why we do the work. And if you care, it means you are more invested in building a stronger future. That's the pathway to kind of prosperity. And we want Austin to be a prosperous place to live, right? Well,
everybody does.
Everybody does. It's a really cool city, right? It also is dealing with some really major issues right now.
Right.
I don't know how they will shape out. What I do know and what I do hope is that people feel like they had a voice in how it does shape out.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Joel, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And thank you for what you're doing with the Austin Monitor.
Thank you.
It's a great website, and appreciate it.
Yeah. It is, and I should mention this. It is, it's just digital, so we actually don't even do the print. We've been talking about newspapers for a while. Yeah, it's a digital news site, easy to read on your phone, and it's something that we are proud of. We hope to continue to kind of increase the reporting and keep doing what we're doing. But conversations like this to really share about a little bit more of the impact and the mission is things that we, really bring us joy and fulfillment and kind of the work there. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot,
Thank
Joel.
you, Sean. I appreciate it.